Hey everyone, Scott here for Forensic Intent. Thank you guys for being here and welcome to another episode. We are looking a little bit different tonight. Rachel is not with us tonight. She's heading out on vacation. And so it's just going to be me and our special guest, Jen Coffindaffer from the FBI, retired FBI agent of 28 years. Jen has a ton of knowledge in this case on the Ellen Greenberg case, and we're going to break it down and talk about it. We're going to also be playing the 911 call that was made by Sam Goldberg. We'll get to all that in just a couple of minutes, but please remember to hit the like and subscribe. We appreciate all of you being here that are here now and all of you that will be joining us. And I'll bring Jen in right now. Here we go. Hey, Jen.
Good evening. How are
Hey,
you?
good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you being on here to talk about this very controversial case.
It is
Um,
controversial.
it is. It is. And so um, let's talk about the case. For those of you who are just joining us or that don't know much about the case, this was a case that occurred in 2011. Ellen Greenberg was found by her fiance in the apartment that they shared. She was found deceased. The case was originally deemed to be suspicious in nature, and ultimately that was changed to become ruled as her taking her own life, essentially. So we're going to break all that down tonight. And hi, Carrie. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Sonia. And hello, Mandy. And thank you again, Jen, for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to you and kind of let you just outline this case, and then we'll go into the 911 call.
Yeah, absolutely. So this case is really in the spotlight right now. I think it's called First Edition. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not good with some of these, but just hit the media on all fronts, written media, mainstream media, and back again in social media because of fortunately, the case has risen to the level of the Supreme Court. But let me outline really quickly what happened. Essentially, in January of 2011, Ellen Greenberg was a school teacher. She taught the first grade. This is in excuse me,
Philadelphia.
Pennsylvania. Yep,
Mhm.
Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I wanted to say Pittsburgh. Thank you. And
Sure.
anyway, she was living with her fiance. They had planned this elaborate wedding. They had their beautiful wedding announcements. She picked out her dress. This was going to be quite the event. And as far as everyone knew, including her parents, they were a happy couple. But on this particular occasion, there was a horrible, horrible snowstorm. And so instead of being at school, she had gone home. Well, Sam, who was her fiance, he was also at home. And according to Sam, he went to go work out in the building where they lived. And after about an hour workout, he came back to open the door, and the door was locked, and she wasn't answering her cell phone. According to him, the door was locked. And so what he decided to do was, according to him again, break down the door. When he broke down the door, he went in and saw Ellen on the floor. Then he called again. This is according to him, and then we're going to talk about what really the evidence shows. And then he made a 911 call. Scott, do you want to play that call? Because I think it's so important for everyone
Yes.
to hear at this juncture. This 911 call, I think, should be used as a training tool for what a 911 call with your possibly deceased loved one would not sound like. So here we go.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Jen, just to let you know, you are freezing up a little bit, but you're still here. I'll let you know if you go away completely.
You know what I'm going to do? Let me close some of these windows.
Okay.
And then I'm also going to close this out. Let's try that and see if that's better. I'm so sorry. I
Oh,
didn't know
that's
that.
okay. No worries at all. Okay, let me play this 911 call here. 1 second while I queue it up.
And you know,
All right.
Ellen, for those of you who don't know, let me know once you have it queued,
Mhm.
Scott, but she was just beautiful. I mean,
Yeah.
you look at this, she was 27 years old. She was really in the prime of her life. She got her degree from Penn State, and then she went on to Temple to get her teaching degree, and then was teaching, grade schoolers. She was living the life, a beautiful apartment, from all appearances, a handsome, successful fiance, until this night in January. Day, I
Yeah.
should say, in January.
Very tragic. Very tragic. Okay, here we go with the 911 call, you guys. I have temporarily lost my chat here, and I have no idea why, so I can't see what anybody's saying right now. So sorry about this, a little bit of a technical issue. I think we'll be back here shortly now. We'll give it a second. Okay, here's the 911 call. Maybe.
Shoot, and you know what, everybody? We tested this before we got on to make sure it
We
would work.
did.
And that's always, I call in the bureau. I don't know if. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
You have to calm yourself down in order to get you some help. I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know. Look at her right now. I can't see anything. There's nothing broken. She's bleeding. You don't know where she's bleeding from? Can't see where it's coming from? I think her head. I think she hit her head. I think. But it's not where. She might have fallen. Do you know what happened? She may have slipped. There's blood on the table. Her face is a little purple. Okay, hold on for rescue for her. Stay on the phone. Went to go work out. I came back up. The door was latched. Fiance's inside. She wasn't answering. So after I decided to break it down, I see her now just on the floor with blood. She's not responding. You're on her back, but you're moving. Okay, do you know how to do CPR? I don't. Okay, I'm going to tell you what to do, okay? Because you get it. I want you to keep her straight. Oh, God. Yeah, okay. Well, you over the phone so they can get it.
It's kind of breaking up a bit.
Oh, my God. Allie, please. You can't freak out. Okay. Her shirt won't come off. It's a zipper. Oh, my God. She stabbed herself. Where? She fell with a knife. Oh, no. Her knife's sticking out. What? There's a knife sticking out of her heart. I guess so. I don't know where she fell on it. I don't know. Okay, well, don't touch it. Okay, so I'm just trying to let her know. Here now. I mean, what do I do? No, you can't. Oh, no. Oh, my goodness. Okay. Police the shop. 277. Is someone coming here? Yes. Yeah. Mr. What? Looks like it's right in her heart. Oh my God. Oh my God. 27. Oh, please don't be. What? Not so warm. I don't know if that means, but there's blood everywhere. I mean, it's pretty deep. Okay. It's a long night. Don't touch it. Yeah, don't anything. Okay. I can't believe this stuff. No, wait, did you? The only one here. Did she? to work. It wasn't like it was a block from the but
It's hard to hear. But
Yeah.
let me just point out, Scott, if I may, some of the
Sure.
highlights.
Yes.
And, I've listened to this tape so many times, but, just first of all, when he comes in and comes upon her, he says he doesn't know what happened, right? I don't know. She might have slipped. She might have fallen. He's so lax. Oh, her face is purple. Um, and then, and this is what you always look for. He goes into this diatribe about what he did. No longer is he talking about, oh my gosh, what can I do? No, he is talking about himself. Well, you see, I went and worked out and then I broke, and I had to break the latch and I came across the corner. No one does that except for people who are trying to explain away their actions. They're already trying to set up their alibi. People who come across a loved one who is perceived as dead, laying in blood, that is not their reaction. And so immediately when I heard this, it made no sense. Then she asked him to give CPR, and he says, oh my God, there's a knife sticking out of her, words to that effect. Well, you were asked early on what might have happened, and you're kind of flailing around. Well, she might have fallen. She might have hit her head. I mean, how about that knife for Captain Obvious?
Exactly.
Out of her? And that he can't really do CPR. His lack of empathy for this person he's supposed to be marrying, the love of his life, just rushes off the page as he's more concerned about himself. Ooh, do I have to? I think he even asked words to that effect. Do I have to? Or,
Mm-hmm.
So Scott, this is just to me, a red flag of a call.
It's huge red flags, Jen, and I agree with you. I mean, those pieces that you just described are the things that really stood out to me with this call too. And when the 911 dispatcher says to him, "Are you okay to do CPR with me?" and his answer is, "Well, I guess I have to, right?" I mean, to me, that was just really very, very telling. Um, from what I've read on this case, Jen, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like some of the neighbors in the apartment complex heard a lot of yelling and screaming going on, like when he was calling her or whatever was going on there. But I mean, my thing is, he set the scene by saying that, I was downstairs working out and I waited at the door for 30 minutes and she never answered, so I kicked the door in. I kind of think that maybe there's a whole different picture going on there of what was really going on because, and I'll let you talk about this, but I know according to the parents of Ellen, she was preparing to leave him. So let's chat about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, what they came upon in the scene was this expensive diamond ring on the table.
Yeah.
When did that come off? Was this part of their argument? I'm leaving you. And she sets the diamond ring down. I'm just saying that this is something to be considered because how else would it have gotten off her finger? So, that's something that I found suspicious. Also, how many times, if you were, everything was fine in your relationship, or maybe even if it wasn't, if you weren't getting along that great, but if you left to go work out and came back, and you couldn't get in and you couldn't contact them, how many people would really kick the door in? Wouldn't you go to the superintendent of your building and say, hey, listen, you all have spare keys. We need to get in. I'm concerned my fiance isn't answering. Or maybe call the police. Hey, I need a wellness check. It's called a wellness check. You can do it on anyone anytime you have a concern. To kick in the door, and then the biggest problem I have from a physical nature is having dealt with these locks that are like on the hotel room
Right.
doors, they're latches, that you put over. They're extremely difficult to get in. So as the SWAT team, when we had to do a breach on a door like that, or even in our training when we practice that, it is so detrimental to the door jamb. It removes the door jamb, the side of the door. It takes so much force. It's not something you can just nudge open with your shoulder. And then when I saw the photograph of the latch, there's no damage.
Right.
No, it's staged to me, totally staged. He didn't break that latch open.
No.
I think, you know, I think he did the latch to make it look that way. That's what
Yes.
it appears to me. He hasn't been charged. He hasn't been indicted, but that's what my investigative mind looks at and sees.
Well, and I agree with you 100% on that, Jen. We're on the same page there. One of the things that he allegedly did say, if what I read on the internet was accurate, and it seemed, I think I read it on CNN, when the police interviewed him, they asked him, did you try to go get something to get inside? Did you go to the landlord, whatever? His response was, I did, but they didn't have anything that could get me in there, which I found to be just a weird statement as well. It made no sense at all.
Right. And as I recall, there were statements that he made that weren't corroborated by the apartment staff.
Right.
Whether they were with him, whether they weren't with him. Look, I mean, at the root of the problem with this case is a shoddy investigation. And when I say shoddy, it's beyond shoddy. The first individuals on scene, I believe it was snowing outside and so forth, and they just wanted it to be a wrap. As some of you may know, the superintendent of the building or the person in charge of the building the next morning, early the next morning, called law enforcement and said, hey, can I have this place cleaned up? Because there's blood everywhere. Yeah. And they said, sure, go ahead.
Yep.
And they literally allowed a professional and gave the number, the law enforcement gave the number of a professional cleaning company.
Yes.
That what they do is bio cleanup, for just crime scenes and things. And they came in and washed away all the evidence.
Yes. You know what's weird about that, Jen, is we had a case that I helped investigate here in our area probably 20 years ago where the exact same thing happened. They allowed the cleaning company to come in and clean it, and it was a disaster of an investigation. The suspect that everyone was pretty sure did it ended up walking because of the investigation. Go ahead.
No, I agree with you, Scott. At the bottom line is this scene should have been roped off. It was initially ruled a homicide, by the way. The ME ruled it a homicide. And then after a closed door meeting, and what ended up being, I saw the determination, I believe, was officially made in April. This, a situation happened into January, but the closed door meeting happened early on. And at the behest, if you will, of law enforcement, it was changed to a suicide. And the reason given by the ME, have a seat if you haven't already, was because he said that the fiance said no one else was there.
Yeah.
He overlooks 20 stab wounds, 10 on the anterior side of her body, in her neck, in her spinal column, that an ME has said would have caused serious brain malfunction. One was, of course, they've shown that one wound was post-mortem due to the bleeding that took place. And 2 knives were used. Who commits suicide and says, oh, this isn't going so well, I think I'll grab another knife?
Exactly.
The gash in the back of her head. And I have tried to sort of play this out, mimic it, not with a knife, but with trying to stab myself with the trajectory. Just can't do it. And some people say, well, some of the wounds were superficial. Well, how I perceive this is grabbing of a knife, this horrible fight, and the stab wounds are perpetrated, but the person receiving the stab wounds is either leaning back or perhaps blindsided.
Right.
You know, she was struck in the back first.
Right.
And then I think it was an overkill situation. The first, or some of the blades are small. And
Mhm.
then the person, I think it was a homicide, switched to a bigger knife to make sure the job was done.
Correct.
That's
So
what I think.
that's and you make a really good point, Jen, with the overkill. I mean, we both know then that suspects sometimes do that when they want to make darn good and sure that they're not identified and that the person is totally deceased. The other thing that I found interesting is that her body was moved when she was sitting up and propped up against the cabinets, is my understanding.
Right. So it's believed she was in the supine position, which is laying back. And the reason they believe that is because the flow of blood flowed horizontally down her face.
Yes.
So yet she was found upright, like I'm sitting, leaned up
Yes.
against the cabinet like this. So if you were stabbed
Mm-hmm.
and leaning against the counter, why would the blood be coming this way?
Right. Horizontally.
Go north to south. So
Yeah.
that is the big reason that they believe she was moved. But again, all this, you know, the crime scene was so adulterated.
Mhm.
You know, for instance, that blood, if she was moved, it would have caused smudges and smears, and any decent crime scene analyst would have been able to prove that she was moved or not moved. Also,
Exactly.
how do you commit suicide like that up against the counter?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just,
No, and none of it makes sense. I mean, the decisions that they made on that are pretty appalling to me, let alone 20 stab wounds. And as you highlighted, Jen, at least one or two pierced her brain, her spinal cord. It's my understanding, I've read both. And if you know the right answer to this, let me know. But I've read that her spinal cord was cut, and I've read that it was not cut. But certainly if it was, she would not have been able to complete the job.
oh, absolutely. Even if it was partially perforated. I mean, you're talking up C1, C2, C3, C4.
Mhm.
That controls your arms, you know, your
Yes.
breathing, your everything. And so if that's perforated, there's a big problem, whether it's even severed or not. And the gash in her head, which I've featured so many times on
Right.
my Twitter account, is large. I mean,
It's
it
large.
bigger knife that went into her skull. And for me, that is just such a crime of passion. When
Yeah.
you see this type of mutilation,
Yes.
which is the only way you could describe this, it's just, and Ellen, by the way, she was a person that was very look conscious.
Right.
She took a lot of pride in her face, in her hair, in her clothing.
Mhm.
This is not, if somebody were the type to commit suicide or felt they wanted to commit suicide, this is a normal suicide would be taking pills, trying to
Yep.
overdose, maybe cutting of the wrist, something
Mhm.
that did not maim and mar your beauty. And so
True.
to just be stabbing yourself all over the place 20 times makes no sense.
Mhm. Makes no sense at all. And Jen, something else I just thought of, and I kind of want your take on this as well. When they were on the 911 call with Sam Goldberg, the fiance, he made a statement to the effect of well, after discovering the knife, which, hello, I don't know how he missed that, but he clearly did not. Anyway, then he made the statement that it looks really long, it looks really deep. So how do I want to say this? It's hard to tell sometimes how long a blade is if it's stuck completely inside your body. What's your take on that, Jen?
Yeah, I mean, that was another thing he said. I was looking, I just wanted to make sure. I think it's Goldman, Sam Goldman, for those who might be looking it up.
It
And
is
then
Goldman. It's not Goldberg. Sorry.
right.
Yeah.
She's, I know it happens all the time. Actually, on I just saw somebody on television say the same thing because it's easy, because they both have gold at the beginning. But anyway,
Yep.
I found that to be very interesting. When he's describing it, he's so removed in terms of emotion. He's not crying. He's not
Right.
overcome with grief. He's yeah, it's pretty deep. And by the way, her face is purple.
Right.
The other thing, I found that odd. If really she had done it and he was only gone an hour, she wouldn't be in that phase of rigor
Right.
and to be completely blue and purple with lack of oxygen.
Right.
So much doesn't make sense. And I just hope there's some justice for this family.
Me too. Me too. Well, and he contradicted himself in the call too, Jen. I'm sure you caught it. He said, yeah, her face is purple, which would indicate she'd been there a while. Yet he says her hands are still warm. I don't really know what that means, but they're still warm. No.
We'll really never know the state she was actually in. And I have found that people, when they're not telling the truth, it's difficult to tell the truth when you're making up stories.
Yeah.
And when you're worrying about covering. So were her hands really warm?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know.
So, we don't know. We don't know a lot. But unfortunately, that autopsy does tell us a lot. And one of the key points that they made was that the one of the wounds that was one ME said was post-mortem. So obviously couldn't be done by her because she was, dead physically. A doctor had said that isn't true, that they tested everything. But then they went back to that doctor. And the doctor said, I have no notes. I have no bill. I have nothing to show that I ever said that. I don't remember this patient. So it didn't happen.
That is so scary.
And yet that ends up in part of the autopsy report, as I recall. That's where I read it. It's just horrible.
It really is horrible. Well, so now the parents have been very vocal. And you did an interview on your show here recently with her dad, with Ellen's dad. So talk about that a little bit, Jen.
It's this family has been through a lot. This was their only daughter. For those in the audience that have a daughter, I just can't imagine the pain of losing a daughter in this way. So they've been through a lot, but it's been a lot of years. It's been a lot of years. This is 2024, mid 2024. This happened in 2011, January. So they've had a lot of time. Their marriage has been through a lot, but they've held everything together. They have paid tens of thousands of dollars. In fact, I think it's more up toward hundreds of thousands of dollars. They hired Sarah Wecht, a renowned ME, to look at the situation. Henry Lee, they hired her. I'm sorry, him. Who's also very expensive. They have hired attorneys. They have a private investigator, who the private investigator is in really, except for expenses and things, is largely working pro bono. When I first got into contact with them, and I honestly can't remember whether they called me or I called them. This has been now 2 years ago or more. They said, listen, we want to pay you. We want to pay you for your advocacy. We need to get this. Don't pay me a dime. Use that money for all these other expenses, particularly the legal expenses. So what they did in 2021, I believe, is they filed a civil suit against the medical examiner's office and against the medical examiner for, basically not doing their job correctly. And their hope is to get the determination to be either undetermined or a homicide. And then it went through the court. And essentially what the court said was, listen, they put this wonderful decision together and said, we believe you, essentially. Oh my God. I mean, you and I are talking about this now, Scott, but
Right.
you had judges all agree that this was egregious. This didn't appear to be a suicide, that just everything was handled totally inappropriately.
Right. Right.
But they said you don't have standing, meaning that the parents had no legal right to come forward with the case. And the premise is that the Ellen Greenberg was harmed, but the parents weren't harmed. So her death did not harm the parents, which is, in my opinion, absolutely ludicrous. The pain that they've suffered without a daughter, without having the possibility of grandchildren, without all those moments, that's loss.
Yeah.
Might not have been monetary loss, but it's loss.
Yeah. No.
And so
100%.
that's what the Supreme Court is going to decide in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be really interesting where it goes. I'm anxious to hear the ruling. I mean, it's my opinion that if they look at the evidence and what they have, and then they use common sense would be another factor to use. I can't imagine them saying that this was anything but suspicious and going down that road, reopening that case and going down that road again.
Yeah, no, I agree. It needs to be really a fresh set of eyes, a fresh homicide detective needs to take a look at this and start from the beginning and try to piece together what they have without a crime scene. I mean, that's going to be the biggest thing. But if they can get a homicide determination and that she was stabbed, you look at who had means, who had motive, and who had opportunity.
Absolutely.
And you start narrowing that field. But the Supreme Court is going to have to rule. They're going to have to make a ruling, and either they're going to back up the lower court and say, no, this is on the books, this is part of law, or they're going to have to set a new precedent to say, listen, parents, they lose too when their adult children are murdered or are killed.
Yeah.
So that's what they're going to decide.
So one thing that I'm not clear on, Jen, and maybe you are, is when exactly, how long does that take for a Supreme Court to look at something like that generally? Is it a lengthy process, or
I think
about
it'd
that?
be a lengthy process. So we know that nothing's going to happen until September. So we have a couple months where briefs, I believe, are due in September. And but then there can be other stages, once the briefs come in. I think we will find out something by next year, though.
Yeah. That
first part of next year.
Yeah. No, I think I expect it probably would be pretty lengthy as well, because like you said, in court, nothing moves fast, generally speaking, anyway. So I want to be very clear in what I'm about to say here. We're not suggesting that Mr. Goldman is the person. He hasn't been convicted, although he is certainly someone who would be worthy of reinvestigating down the road if that's what the Supreme Court decides. But his current status is he is now remarried. He has 2 children. He lives in New York. I believe New York. He's an independent film producer, I believe. So, he's kind of gone on with his life, and, we'll see where this ultimately ends up. But that's it. For those of you who are kind of wondering where he is and where he stands now, that's what I know about that. Yeah.
And certainly, as we said on the top, he hasn't even been charged.
Right.
Hasn't even been charged.
He has not.
A suicide. Basically, they're saying that a crime didn't even happen here.
Right.
So because of that, we're just trying to put together some pieces of the puzzle and give our independent notions as to certainly the starting point for law enforcement and concerns that any law enforcement officers, retired or not, would have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So here's a question from Mandy, and I don't know the answer to this. Maybe you do, Jen, but I if you don't, that's fine. So she's asking, they didn't subpoena his cell phone or anything like that. Do you know anything about that piece?
Yeah, so this is interesting. The cell phones that were there, Goldman's uncle, who was a judge, I believe it was the uncle. I know he was a judge. And he
Mm-hmm.
actually was a judge that had a sort of superiority, if you will, over other judges. He looked at issues, I think, with other judges, was part of his duties. He was called by Goldman called him.
Mm-hmm.
He came over like, a scene out of Pulp Fiction, The Wolf. He comes over there, he gathers up all the cellular devices, gathers up
She goes,
the
oh, there you are.
laptops. Or did I lose you? He gathers up those
Yeah, you
devices.
did, but you're back now.
He gathers up the cell phones and the electronic devices and he takes them.
Mm-hmm.
The uncle
Wow.
of Goldman, before
Wow.
the scene was even looked at by
I did read that.
So that's what happened with those. And then later on, they were relinquished, but who knows what all was done with them in the time frame.
Heck yeah.
And he knew better than that. He's a judge, an attorney. You don't go into a scene like that and start picking up the dead person's phone and laptop.
Well, it's just really suspicious behavior. Clearly, it's very suspicious, under the guise of looking for a suit for Sam to wear to the funeral when Ellen had her funeral. And lo and behold, ended up taking all those things along with him. So yeah. Yeah, a little bizarre. Let's look at some other questions here, because we haven't really done that yet. Jen, do you know anything? Alan's asking, did they check cameras, anything like that? Do you know anything about that?
So, yes, there were no cameras on the floor.
Okay.
Where the apartment was, but there was a first floor camera, as I recall. And you can see him. I've seen this footage on camera, sort of coming back from the gym.
Right.
I've seen that footage. So, but the issue is there wasn't a camera at their door or inside the unit. So unfortunately, the video really doesn't show much except for him.
Yeah.
Back.
Yeah. Yeah, the other thing that comes to my mind that I just remembered after Alan's question and after you were talking about the cameras is Sam had said that he had gone downstairs to talk to the security person down there to have him come up and help him get into the apartment. So that was looked into, and the security person has testified, or has stated to the police rather, that he never left his post and never went upstairs. And then they did check the cameras on that, and there is no camera footage of him ever leaving his post and ever going upstairs with Sam. So just another piece that's pretty suspicious. Definitely.
Yeah.
So let me see here. Just kind of looking for other questions here. A lot of comments.
Well, it's a case that, depending on the Supreme Court ruling, it could end.
Yes.
That quickly. It could be over with no appealable avenues.
Yeah.
And so I think all of us are just holding our breath, saying we hope that this moves in the right direction. But just the fact it was accepted is so rare, because so many cases are considered. And I just have to think that they looked at this case and said, wait a minute, standing? How can you say a parent doesn't suffer a loss when they lose a child? And that's my understanding of it, that they don't have standing because they didn't lose. It just doesn't make sense. And maybe they're thinking that too.
It doesn't make sense. So for those of you who are interested in looking further at what the parents have to say, I would definitely suggest that you go to Jen's show, Break the Case with Jen Coffindaffer. She does a really good interview with with the doctor, with Dr. Greenberg, Ellen's dad. That will definitely give you some more context if you're interested in that. Check that out, because I watched that interview and it's a good one. So
Also, it's probably been January, February, probably February, Scott, I interviewed the private investigator of the Greenbergs that they hired. And that's a really good one too, because he's been in the thick of this case. He has so many intricate details. He's looked at the case file, at least in part, is my understanding. So when I interviewed him, he was just a plethora of knowledge. And then at the end of that interview, I interviewed both the Greenberg's parents to really give insight about her, who she was as a person, lots of, fond memories and pictures and things like that. So touches the side of the victim.
Yeah, very interesting. No, like I said, you guys, if you haven't seen those, definitely go to Jen's website or her show, Break the Case with Jen Coffindaffer, and check those out. So I have to check out the private investigator. I haven't seen that yet. So let's see here. So let me just take a quick look here. So Alan's asking, Alan, are you asking about the name of the person that the name of the fiance, or what are you asking here? I'm not quite clear on it. I might have missed part of it. Just put it in chat here real quick while I look through some more things.
The fiance is Sam Goldman.
Yes.
Handsome guy. It's just terrible, really.
Yeah, the whole case is very disturbing.
Show you a picture really quick of him.
Okay.
If you can see.
It's not. Yeah, you just froze up.
I wonder why that's freezing.
Yeah, there he is. You can sort of see that.
Handsome guy. I mean, they look like, right out of the cover of a magazine. They're just the most handsome couple, and this wedding they had planned was unbelievable. The venue site, and so it's just strange how all of this occurred, and it seems like a crime of passion to me.
It does me too, and I mean, it's my opinion that there'd been some things going on behind the scenes between those two for quite a while. The dad kind of almost. Go ahead, Jen. You were going to interject something.
No, you go ahead. I just am telling myself to remember something. Go ahead.
Okay. No, basically that, when you're in your interview with the dad, he had basically said, he thought that Ellen was on her way over that night. She was preparing to leave Sam. She had packed up all of her makeup, which was very important to her. She had packed up or taken off her engagement ring. And he believed that she was on the way over or getting ready to come over to the house that night. And we all know that one of the most dangerous times in domestic violence situations is when the victim is preparing to leave the offender. Again, I don't know that was going on with Sam and Ellen, but you can certainly make a good case that's a good possibility.
Well, and I think the really part of the case that does make a good case for that is she had bruises, according to the autopsy report, in various stages of healing.
She did.
You see that it gives a lot of pause on her chest, I believe her arms. I have the autopsy report. It's, they're always horrible to read, but that's something that really stands out when you have bruising like that. I mean, let's face it, unless you're playing some sort of physical contact sport as a 27-year-old woman that's not playing sports, it's unusual to have bruising like that in various stages.
It is. Yeah. I read the same thing, and you're correct. She had quite a bit of bruising, also on her legs and on her stomach. So, where's that coming from? I mean, so Jen, Mandy, who, has put a message out, says, can you please hold up that picture again? She just wanted to take a look at it.
Absolutely. Let me do that. Let me get.
While you're doing
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, there. Can you see?
No, there it is. Perfect. Yes, that's much clearer. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
that's been.
I mean, she was breathtakingly beautiful.
Yeah.
She's just one of those that I've got probably 40 pictures of her. Her family was kind enough to send me a whole picture book of pictures from when she was a baby
Hmm.
until her death. And she just, oh my gosh, just a beautiful child. I mean, not that that has anything to do with anything other than the
Sure.
fact that you just, it's just, to me, from a investigative standpoint, again, people like that typically don't stab themselves all over their body
No.
and commit that kind of carnage on themselves.
No. No. It's that's one of the things that really caught my attention with this case, Jen, is first of all just the sheer depravity of it, and that's the situation in itself, and how she sustained those injuries, but also as I mentioned to you earlier, I had a very similar case when I was in detectives that made no sense, and it was also ruled a suicide, and oh my gosh, it was not. So I'm here to say it was not, but that's the way it was ruled.
Scott, it's
So.
funny. I was just going to ask you about that because you had shared that with me, and you
Mhm.
should go into a few details into that case to show the parallel.
Sure. So back, it's probably 25 years ago, I was assigned to detectives. I was in detectives for a period of 9 years, and we had a case where a gentleman here in our county in Oregon. He was well known to law enforcement because he had a lot of mental health issues, and he was constantly calling us all the time with the most bizarre things that you could possibly think of. So he was very well known to us. Well, we get a call. I don't remember who called or how it was discovered, but he was discovered deceased inside his trailer. He had stabbed himself with several different instruments, all kinds of times. He stabbed himself through his ear. He stabbed himself in the head. I think he stabbed himself in the neck. All of this took place while he was in the shower. Okay. So then, after doing that to himself, he allegedly had the presence of mind to wash all of the blood, and he lost a lot of blood down the drain of the shower. Well, as we dig into it deeper, it comes out that he had met this guy who he did not know, who was coming over to his house that night to have some dinner. When we got there to the scene, there were two thawed steaks on his kitchen counter. So it was obvious he was going to barbecue and have some dinner with someone. We interviewed, in fact, I ended up interviewing the cab driver who dropped this suspicious person off at his house that afternoon. The cab driver told me that when he left, um, the the person that he dropped off was walking around the house and kind of looking for a way to get in. Basically, that person was never identified. Never. We could never get him identified. So, long story short, um, we have all these bizarre injuries. We have mental illness. We have blood washed down the drain. He then, according to what the evidence showed, I mean, he allegedly wandered down the hallway of his trailer and collapsed somewhere at the end of the trailer. I don't believe he did that. I believe he was drugged and he was placed there. So we never were able to come up with anything on the case at all, and it was deemed we. And I'm just going to put it out there, you guys. I mean, there are lazy police officers in this world, and we had some lazy police officers at that time in our department, and a couple of them happened to be the case officer, and they didn't want to go down the suicide or the homicide road. They said, this looks like a suicide. We're going to call it a suicide. He's had mental health issues all these years. He finally did himself in. And so that's the case. The thing that was concerning to me is that the medical examiner went along with it and was like, okay, I think you guys are probably right. We're going to call it a suicide. And so that's the case. Very similar. my opinion is that absolutely was not someone who took their life. That was a homicide, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it does happen. Some people will stab themselves
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
way that they choose to take their life, but it's rare.
It's rare. It's rare. And
So
I actually,
cool.
sorry, Jen, I actually consulted with a doctor here locally too. That's the part that I left out. It was a doctor. My wife's a nurse, and it was a doctor who had worked with her for years and was just brilliant. And I took the information to him, and he's like, there's just no way. Not with that amount of blood loss. There's just no way. And so, yeah, just one of those things that got brushed aside, unfortunately.
Yeah, it really does mimic this case.
Mm-hmm. It really does. Yeah. Well, let me just look through real quick here. Jen, I think we've pretty much covered everything. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about on this?
No, I just, hopefully people will use their platforms to
Yeah.
show this video. Hopefully they'll try to keep her face and her name out there because, but for pushback, in your case of the man you talked about, his family probably didn't do anything to push back against these rulings. But for her family fighting now for more than a decade
Yeah.
to try to get this determination changed and to try to fight for justice for Ellen, nothing would
Mhm.
happen. And it really takes people like everybody in the audience to really push.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree 100%. Here's a question real quick. Will the Supreme Court hearing be made public? What's your take
Great,
on that, Jen?
great question. I don't know. I think it's a possibility. We saw a hearing recently in the Indiana Supreme Court in the Delphi case, and that was made public. I was so glad it was made public,
Mhm.
so we could see everything they said about that judge and their rulings. Um, I think that it's rare that that happens. I hope it happens. I hope they are pushing for that. But we are or they are in the infancy stages, right? They haven't even seen the briefs yet,
Right.
which are due for a couple more months. So I actually think I'll call Dr. Goldberg and ask him, are
Mhm.
you, please make sure you ask your attorney to push for a public audience, because this case is a really important case and could be case precedent.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good idea for you to
Great
call him
question.
and suggest that. Yeah, very good question. Let me see here real quick. Sonia, I'm assuming that you're referring to the case I was talking about here in Oregon. If you are, they have no suspects um, in that case. And if you're talking about the one with Ellen, they also have not named anybody a suspect there, as far as I know.
You're right, because
Mm.
they called it a suicide. So if it's a
Correct.
suicide, there's no suspect. So it sort of shuts down an active investigation. The minute you say somebody took their life, it's kind of over.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. Well, we're going to hope for the best. And like Jen was saying earlier, you guys, if you have platforms to use, please do use them to keep this case alive. Because it definitely, in my opinion, needs to be reinvestigated again. A couple of things I wanted to cover. First of all, I want to thank Jen for coming on again today. It's always great having you. I also, you guys might notice we now actually have a moderator here. So I wanted to thank Mandy Strong for coming aboard as part of the team to help moderate. And really appreciate that a lot, Mandy. So thank you. And appreciate all of you showing up today and all of the questions. We'll probably be covering this case more as we go down the line, because there's going to be more, in my opinion, that's going to come out, I hope. And so we'll definitely keep this case fresh and as fresh as we can. So also, I wanted to mention, for those of you who just got here, you might have noticed that Rachel's missing tonight, and it's just because she went on vacation. So she should be back here in the next couple of shows that we do. So we'll be back to full staff. So thank you guys all a lot. And like I said earlier, hit the like and subscribe if you haven't already done that. And we appreciate you tuning in, and we will see you guys all next time. All right.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Scott.
Thank you,
Bye.
guys. Thank you. Take care, guys.